And there we go.
We want to welcome everyone watching this program, both live as I speak and on replay, and thank you for joining us. This is the Rare Book Cafe, the first only video program in the entire world about antiquarian books. I'm your host, Steve the Bookman Eisenstein. Today is our second show on our new home, Google Hangouts on Air. We want to thank you for joining us. We're also available now and on replay at Rare Book Cafe on Facebook, on YouTube, and at floridabookfair.blogspot.com, home of our sponsor, the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair. My co-hosts from version 1.0 are all back with me, my good friend Thorne Donnelley of Liberty Books and West Palm Beach, and Lindsay Thompson of Henry Bemis Books in Charlotte, North Carolina. Our creator and executive producer, Alan Smith, is flicking switches and turning knobs in the control room, and our guest today is the noted Florida educator and science fiction author, Rick Wilber. Later in the program, we'll have Edie's Miniature Corner, starring my beautiful and blushing bride, Edie Eisenstein. Also, our Hidden Treasures feature. If you love unusual books, you definitely don't want to miss this segment. We'll also have a mix of our recurring features, including The Third Degree, The Burning Question, and his collector class, and the big idea later in the program. You can send us questions and comments through the connect features or the contact features on YouTube, Facebook, and Blogger, whichever you are seeing us through. We would love your questions. We'll be watching and responding on today and future shows. If you're new to the program and want to be alerted about other episodes of the Rare Book Cafe, be sure to like and follow the show on Facebook and share it with your friends. If you are listening to any other devices, please turn them off. It causes feedback, and having a radio on will bury us in copyright infringements and notices from YouTube. So it's always better if you have something on in the background, not to have it on while the program's on. Gentlemen, I ask, what's been going on in the wonderful world of rare books this week? Thorne, Lindsay?
Well, for me, it's been kind of a slow week. A friend of mine opened a bookstore in Palm Beach. Went up and looked at him. I've been kind of preparing for the show. We've been selling a lot of books. I was shipped so far this week to Germany and England and France. So that's always kind of good. It's, I guess, Germany being, I believe, what is the home of Father Christmas. I was happy to send them a book, and wasn't a Christmas book, but we're getting a lot of that. I have a new bookstore here as well as an antiquarian bookstore, so this time of year there's not much antiquarian business going on. It's really more new business, wrapping, trying to remember how to wrap packages and all that kind of good stuff. So that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. And then I'm actually kind of looking forward to see our guest. I love his work, and I'm always pleased to see him. I was born in Florida, and a lot of people seem to forget that Florida does have authors. We're not just hurricanes. We have a couple major universities that do more than play football, you know, that kind of thing. We have a fairly, I think I've mentioned before, we have I have some reference books taking us back to the mid-15th century, which for those of those who have a little trouble counting, it's 1450s of Florida literature. Wow. So we're going back. As somebody mentioned last week, something I love about Florida is the fact that those silly people in the Mayflower and all the Jamestown, all that nonsense that had brains, they would have landed about 500 miles further south to hit St. Augustine, where there's already a fully functioning hotel, and they probably could have ordered up room service. So I don't know what that Yankee nonsense is all about. Steve, take it from there.
We have culture and class in Florida. We just spell it with a K. Lindsay, what's going on?
Well, it's actually been a good week for Henry Bemis Books, for which all the gods be praised. It's been a long, drought-ridden year for me as a startup, but I've had some checks come in, and there's food in the pantry again, and so I'm a happy camper. A couple of new books that have come in as well. One is a very nice first edition of Sweet Tuesday, or Thursday rather, one of the stories that made up John Steinbeck's Cannery Row series, for a book published in 1954. This is in remarkably good condition. And even when you open it up, there's no foxing or fading or any of the things you usually associate with a book that, like all books, nobody thought would become collectible when it first came out and got stuck up on a shelf and then stuck in the attic or the basement by the heirs. Another one that I'm particularly pleased with is Mateo Coley's Manhattan Unfurled. This is the box for it. This is a graphic book published some years ago, about 16, 17 years ago now, by an artist in New York who took a boat ride around Manhattan and decided to draw the skyline. And so the book actually folds out.
Wow.
Very nice.
Some many
Oh
feet.
my goodness.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
And actually is a visual trip all the way around Manhattan. It's a lovely book, unusual too, because it's basically laid out like an accordion.
Oh, wow.
And
Do they mention any
also-
bookstores in it?
Beg pardon?
Do they mention any bookstores in it?
No, it's purely visual, but it also comes with an essay I remember reading in the New Yorker by Paul Goldberger, the architecture critic. And part of what made it so significant was that it was published just before 9/11, and the Twin Towers, which were then the iconic element of the Manhattan skyline, were suddenly, for all of us of that age, gone. And so it's, in that way, a piece of associational history, I guess you would say. So I'm hoping to find good homes for those this week as well.
How can people reach you, Lindsay?
I'm on, well, email's the easiest, Henry Bemis Bookseller at Gmail. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Blogger as Henry Bemis Books.
For me, I was kind of getting ready for the show, and I read that beautiful post that you did on Rick, so I was aware of tour books and all of that. But I said, well, let me bring out some science fiction and fantasy. So this is a science fiction. Am I in a proper position with the book?
Yes.
Okay,
I
don't
can't
care if
quite
I'm on.
see the,
Yes.
Up,
the
down?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm on the money?
Yes.
Is that
This
Nancy Press?
Yeah, it's Motive Press.
Oh, no, that, okay.
Miss it. I can't read it backwards. But it's science fiction and fantasy, nom de plumes.
Ah, yes.
I thought that would be interesting to just kind of show. I'm debating whether I'm culling out some of my reference books or not. I had a friend, and I say this jokingly, Jimmy Dore of Once Upon a Time Books, and a gentleman by the name of Harvey Stanson. They at one time were great friends and partners in the book business. They got me into the book business, and I used to joke, if there was an estate sale on Long Island and there was an Arkham House book anywhere on Long Island, Jimmy would be magnetically attracted to the sale. My first Arkham House in 45 years till probably 20 years ago. And it was in such bad condition. The only thing I could take out of it was this August Derleth's signature.
Sweet.
You know, inscribed. Yeah, it was funny, inscribed to somebody. And today on the radio program, I tried to give this book away twice, asking questions on science fiction. Answer them.
Stephen, your hit questions are always too hard.
I know.
Well,
I know.
I have a
comes
way
with-
of solving that.
You just have shy listeners.
Yeah, I think that too. That too.
All the people who miss Garrison Keillor have now come to you. It's the shy people on radio, and they don't speak up much.
Try and make it color radio. Well, I guess that's kind of what's been happening. Alan, by any chance, I know you don't hunt for books, but by accident, did you find one?
Well, a little later in the program, and I do have we have some mail from an interested listener who has a question about a collection, but we'll get to that later in the
Okay.
program.
Well, let me reintroduce. We're thrilled to have Rick Wilbur join us today on the Rare Book Cafe. Rick is a longtime journalist and mass communications professor, a textbook author and editor, a novelist, writer of short stories, and a memoirist. I like that. His new science fiction novel, Alien Morning, is set here in Florida, and it's published by Tor. Thanks for joining us today.
Delighted to be here, of course.
Tell us about what got you started as a science fiction writer.
Well, I grew up in a sports family in the Midwest in St. Louis, and my father was a baseball player and manager, and it was assumed that that all 5 of the kids would be high quality athletes, and we were. The 2 girls were very talented athletes, and his 3 sons were all talented athletes. But I started reading heavily by about 3rd grade. We had one of those unusual Carnegie libraries in our small town, and it just had a great, what was then called juvenile science fiction section. And I had a librarian that steered me in that direction, and I never looked back. I read every science fiction book, juvenile and adult, in that library over the next several years. And so I was just deeply hooked. I've been a heavy reader ever since. I still read 2 or 3 books a week. I still read a science fiction novel every week or 2. So it's just been, it was something that worried my father a lot. Frankly, because I was inside reading books instead of outside playing baseball. But Mom spoke up for me, bless her heart, and that's what got me started being a reader, and then being a writer, and then being a science fiction writer.
In those earlier years, were you reading magazines? Were you actually reading the hard copy of a Mycroft Moran or a Shasta?
No, I sort of missed out on. Are we talking the pulp era, or the beginnings of that? And I was not a subscriber to the magazines, even the great classic Amazing and the rest of those. I went straight to books, and then in the 1960s and into the 1970s, I became a heavy reader of first of all, analog was where I started reading, and then fantasy and science fiction, and then I was one of the first subscribers to what was then called Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine.
Yes.
Back in the 70s when it started.
I would gather my next question, the answer might be Isaac Asimov and others. What writers influenced you in the beginning?
Well, the very first, I remember it distinctly, the very first book I read was Lucky Star and the Moons of Jupiter by Paul French. And Paul French was the pseudonym, and we just did the whole pseudonym thing, of Isaac Asimov.
Oh,
and so I read all of the Lucky Stars, and then went on from there. So I read all of the great classic authors of the 50s and into the 60s. I was a heavy Heinlein reader, and then Arthur C. Clarke, and then Ursula Le Guin later on, and I sort of followed the traditional standard path of people who were just caught up in science fiction in that era. I joined fandom, it was all, I would just really, really appealed to me as a literary form.
Your new novel, Alien Morning, is set here in Florida. Why Florida? What about, tell us about that.
That novel emerges from a number of short stories, novelettes, and novellas that I've published mostly in Asimov's science fiction magazine over the years. And first one of those I published, the setting was, the story came to me when I was jogging on the beach in Paso Grill, which is a beach area near St. Petersburg on the Gulf. And so I set it there, and then I was kind of trapped. So many of things have been set there ever since, as all those stories emerged and the characters literally emerged from the water. They're an aquatic species. And so when it came time to write Alien Morning, I already had, characters and setting in place and a lot of the history of it in place. And so I pretty much stayed in touch with the history I had already developed of those aliens.
And baseball plays the integral part or a part thereof?
Not so much in this one. I write a lot of baseball, but and we'll talk about that. But in Alien Morning, I'm sometimes accused of using baseball too often, so I thought I'd be very daring. And my protagonist in Alien Morning is a Division II European basketball player. So for me, that was really stretching the envelope to have a basketball player. But I was a good athlete. I played college basketball at Division II, and so I know the game pretty well and still pay attention to it. So I was comfortable using that as a tool.
In a few years, he'll be an agent?
Yeah. I actually have a brother-in-law who's an agent, European basketball agent. So he was one of my sources I went to for all my details about European ball.
Mike, my colleagues on the show have heard this before. I say this from the heart. You took baseball and you developed it as a part of this series of novels. I'm so stuck with this intergalactic book fair business. How do you expand an idea like that? You took baseball and you made it work. Is there a way to describe the thought process? I am so stuck on just the title that I can't figure out anything else. I don't know where to go with it.
So, yeah, I can, it's, I didn't go to baseball or basketball or sports. It came to me. So that was sort of the tools I have at hand when I began to write. And so when I wrote about aliens, and because of that deep science fiction background, sports and science fiction are two things that I have this huge sort of internal whole world built up. I know those two things really well. So it's not surprising that I often have had baseball, basketball, even football. I've had those in my short stories. I've had about 50 short stories published, and baseball is in there way too much. I'm aware of that, but that's sort of the tools I have.
I'm accused of doing something too much about a certain book, but I see where you interweaved it. I never looked at it. You kind of gave me a subliminal thought and how it could interweave, but let's move on from there. If I ever get anything past the title, I'll concur with you, Doctor.
All right.
So, Tor Books, major publisher.
Right.
How did you wind up being published by Tor?
Well, I had a Tor novel out in about 2003 called The Cold Road. That was a thriller novel about a young girl who has some horrible things happen to her in her youth. And then in her adulthood, faced by some dangerous situations, she overcomes them and she finds peace ultimately. And by the way, I have her as a basketball player at the University of Minnesota. So, and the book, book got good reviews, did not sell very well. And so I sort of thought maybe my relationship with Tor had come to an end. But an editor, a guy I really like, who'd been the editor of the first book, he and I started talking about a novella that I had. It's these Sudani aliens that are in Alien Morning, and he said, "I bet that would make a good novel." And I said, "Yeah, let's go for it." So I put together a package, and he took it, up the line, got the okay. Somewhere in that process, it became a trilogy, which is not what I had in mind at first. But Tor would rather do a trilogy than a standalone. So you can imagine when they called me and said, "Are you willing to have it be a trilogy?" I thought about it for several seconds, gave it a lot of thought, and agreed that that yes, I'd be happy to have it be a trilogy. And it's been great fun to write. That meant I had to completely dismantle everything I had in mind for the novel, because now it has to be a trilogy. But, you know, if you're a writer, that sort of pushing and shoving and dismantling and rewriting is all an oddly pleasurable thing. So I really enjoyed that process.
It's fairly common to read about authors in the bigger world of fiction getting 3-book deals, but trilogies seem to be a science fiction thing. Is there something unique to that genre that makes a 3-book deal workable or artistically viable in a way that a single book doesn't?
I think you're probably onto something, but more with fantasy than with science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But after all, you're in either case, fantasy or science fiction, you have to be so inventive of a world. I'm finishing up book 2 of the trilogy right now, and much of it is set on the alien homeworld, which means I have to conjure up in my own head that entire planet, which is another really enjoyable thing to do, but it takes a lot of sort of space to talk about that. So half of the second novel is set on that homeworld, half of it's set back on Earth, and it's a case of you know, it all comes together in novel number 3. There are a number of cases of trilogies that found success, and so by the time you're working on book 3, you know, they're telling you really don't want to end it at 3, and so then you're pulling apart book 3 and trying for more, and I think that's common. I'd be very happy to have it be a trilogy. That would make me be very satisfied with that. I'm not looking to do more, and I'd like to move in some other directions after that. I'd really like to write a novel that doesn't have sports in it. I don't think I'll ever actually do that.
When you write, do you write with any thought about it being scriptable?
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to see a novel become a movie, to see it become a film, see it become a television series, and I've had friends that's happened to. The current hot science fiction film Arrival emerges from a novelette written by a friend of mine, Ted Chiang, who's a brilliant writer of the shorter forms of science fiction. And so, I mean, I'm no Ted Chiang, but it's just great to see that those things happen. I haven't seen that movie yet. Everybody seems to be raving about it. So that's something. So yeah, I'd like to think they would make good features.
Have you had a chance to ask him what he thought of the movie? Because I always think of what John le Carré said about selling his books. He said it was like someone buying your prize oxen and bringing you back a jar of bouillon cubes.
yeah. Ted has. Now, I haven't talked to him about it. I've just been reading what he had to say about it, and his comments have been very positive, actually. I think he had a good relationship. And a couple of other of my friends have had that happen and have described in detail. One of my friends, Robert J Sawyer, a Canadian writer, one of the top writers in Canada, his novel Flash Forward became a TV series on ABC, Flash Forward. And he described in great detail what it was like, all the changes that happened. And he described how they told him when they were first turning it into a TV show that it had to be set in LA instead of Switzerland, instead of Geneva, and that everybody had to be attractive. So yeah, these are the parameters within which you work. I think he got to write 1 episode for the first season of that, and he found it all very, very interesting. But yeah, they're very different forms, and changes happen.
Rick, I always say to an author, may your books become rare in your lifetime, and may you go into 21st printings. But for you, I'm going to add on, I hope you have a cult classic that goes to film.
Well, wouldn't that be nice?
So
that would be nice.
I am now going to introduce a portion of the program, and it is called The Third Degree. But first, let me remind you, this is the Rare Book Cafe, and we are brought to you by the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair, April 21st through 23rd next year in St. Petersburg at the Coliseum. But back to The Third Degree. As every reader of old-time detective novels knows, that's what police used to give criminals who were not talking to them, the third degree. Our version is less violent, just as painful. So, victim, Mr. Wilbur, are you ready to be interrogated with the third degree?
I think I'm ready. I'm sweating. I can feel the hot light beating down on me, and I know what's going to happen to me if I don't have answers. So
it's not that bad. It's really not that bad.
Fire away.
Are you ready? What
Sure.
book, if there is one, did you never return to a library or a friend?
I had, when I was an undergraduate student at Southern Illinois University, I had a professor whose name is Dickie Spurgeon. I think he's still alive. And he actually got me excited about Shakespeare. He was the Shakespearean on campus. And he gave me to read, because I was a heavy reader and said, I'll read it. He gave me the collected works in one volume of Shakespeare. And I took that home, and I could turn around here and find it right now. And that was about 1970. So, Dickie, if you're watching this, I apologize, and I'll get it back to you real soon now.
There's a message and an address coming up. No, the instant message. Okay. Question number 2. What is your favorite guilty pleasure book? The kind you read when nobody's looking, or that you hide in a different dust jacket?
All right. My favorite guilty pleasure book is The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. And I just disagree really strongly with Mark Twain's assessment of Cooper. I think it's terrific, and I love the book. I reread it every 5 or 6 years. I really like the movie from about 10 or 12, 15 years ago. Daniel Day-Lewis in the role, and I like that novel so much, despite what people don't like about Cooper, that I wrote a piece for a collection from international thriller writers about thrillers, and I made the claim that The Last of the Mohicans was the first American thriller novel, and I defended my claim, and I think I did a pretty good argument. Cooper, of course, is famous for being the first American author, I think, the first American author to write distinctly American settings, distinctly American characters, and to put them into sort of the rough and tumble of a developing nation, as opposed to just copying everything from England, which is pretty much what was done before that time. So I'm a Cooper fan, and The Last of the Mohicans is my guilty pleasure.
What is the most expensive book you have ever touched or seen, or both?
Well, I often go to Ireland. I've been to Ireland 25 times. And so I've never been able to touch it, but that means I've seen the Book of Kells exhibit at the Trinity College Library 25 times. And they turn the pages every day. So I've seen a significant portion. I've seen several pages 25 different times of the Book of Kells, which is just a wonderful illuminated manuscript. Of course, one of the world's great illuminated manuscripts. And it's very, very exciting to me each time.
I have a funny Book of Kells story. Years ago in the Miami radio market, there was a show on called Rick and Suds, and they were doing a trip to Ireland, and they were talking about the Book of Kells. So I gave them, I had the facsimile copy, that big green facsimile copy in the slipcase. So I gave them the book to either give away as a prize on the trip or use it on the plane. But I don't know if they ever took off the ground, and I never knew what happened. I just know the radio station is about a half a nautical mile that way, and they got the book. So
they borrowed that book from you and never returned it.
Yeah, that's a good. Well, I gave it in good faith.
Well,
I don't know what they did.
interesting. Now I understand why you asked that question. All right.
Well, no, not really, but it was a lead-in. I never came up with that one before. What book or books right now are on your nightstand?
Right now, I'm thinking of books I'm reading at the moment. I just read a book about that. I have a real interest in World War II, and I just read a book about the 12 days leading up to Pearl Harbor, and he just dissects all the near misses where Pearl Harbor could have been an entirely different. Might never have taken place. The very fact that the Japanese fleet came all the way across the Pacific undetected, and it's just full of all these. I love these little moments where if things had gone differently, that's the alternate history writer in me. If things had gone slightly differently, would have been an entirely different outcome to the war in the Pacific, but to the World War II in general.
Totally agree. I love the time-space continuum, or redirect the time-space something, in the order of history, and get a great sci-fi story. Okay, and finally, our salute to our favorite interviewer, James Lipton of the Actors Studio. What is your favorite curse word? Read it in a book. And you can say it because we're on cable and we don't report to nobody.
Well, I suppose I use the mild blandishment, damn it, probably too much in my writing. But when I'm writing, I must say I say shit an awful lot. And sometimes I use the F word directed toward myself when I'm having trouble with a scene. And I'm born and raised a Catholic, so I'm always perfectly willing to blame myself for anything. And if it's going wrong, it must be my fault, and I'll tell myself to. I don't know that I even though we're not on the air, I'll avoid the F word, but that with me.
Learn how to say it in another language. I think I can say shy shit, merde, in another language.
That's very useful.
Rick, yeah, sometimes, yeah. I want to thank you for being such a good sport. And right now it is time for Edie's Miniature Book Corner. I am going to introduce my wife in a moment, but first let me remind you that the Rare Book Cafe is brought to you by the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair. The book fair is held April 21st through the 23rd in St. Petersburg. There's over 120 dealers from around the world and around the country, and it is booksellers' paradise, as well as everything else that is so good going on in St. Petersburg. And now I'm going to introduce my wife Edie for a little lesson in miniature books.
Well, he's getting Edie. I thought I'd mention one of my favorite science fiction authors. It's Mellish. It's called the Merrimack, the Tour of the Merrimack, which is
Hi, guys.
Okay.
Okay, I missed that.
Okay, let's go with that. I was just trying to kill.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Yes.
Edie.
Okay, hi, how are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
It's good to be seen. Today, I'm going to tell you about first two other members of our family besides Stephen and I. We have two cats. One is Shadow. Shadow was thrown out by one of our neighbors that got her free on Craigslist, and she started to follow Stephen around like a shadow. And so consequently we said, look, if you're not going to keep this cat that you got free from Craigslist, we will adopt her. So $200 later, when she was fixed and she got all of her shots, this free cat from Craigslist was ours. And there is Stephen with Shadow in person. An indoor-outdoor cat when we got her, and played with other cats in the building that since moved away with their owners. And she was lonely. So we started to visit the Humane Society, which is such a wonderful place to get animals. We didn't find anybody, and I went in there one day by myself, and there I saw Tiger. Now, Tiger, there's Tiger. His name on the cage was Little Stevie.
Stevie J.
Stevie J. Now, couldn't you see me running around the condominium complex going, here's Stevie, here's Stevie. And so we renamed him Tiger. But the Humane Society fixes animals and makes sure they're healthy before they give them away. So now you know all four of us. Miniature books. Today, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the Miniature Book Society. There's Julian Edison, who has been doing books for over 50 years, featured on the cover of this month's copy. You get the most beautiful books from them. Created beautifully, beautifully. This was a contest for miniature books. It is an education in itself. And I would strongly advise anyone that likes miniature books who is not a member of the society, Google them and send your $40 check to Karen Nyman. Karen Nyman is a diamond in the miniature book world. She lives in California, and I am lucky enough to get her miniature book catalog every month. To my knowledge, there is no price guide for miniature books, but her catalogs list publisher, title, author, base, the number of copies printed, the binding, the description, the size, and then what she's selling it for. Her catalogs are usually 11, 12, 15 pages, and she puts on pictures of the books that she's got for sale, as well as the description. I called her yesterday and told her I was going to mention her on the air, and she said that her, you can get these catalogs free online. And for a nominal charge, she will send you one. I always get these printed copies because if I see something that she's selling and I've got one in my collection, I get all excited. Karen is in 702 Rosecrans Street in San Diego, California. If you Google her, you'll find her, Karen Nyman 2. That's KAREN IMAN number 2 at cox.net. And her website is www.karennymanminiaturebooks.com. I can't recommend joining the Miniature Book Society and getting in touch with Karen and looking online because they are spectacular. Before I forget, Lindsay,
Yes.
I want you to have a very happy birthday this week.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you are very welcome. You are very welcome. The next miniature book to turn the page that I'm going to talk about is the Micro Bibliophile. Now, the Micro Bibliophile is another publication about miniature, and I have my check made out to them that I am going to mail away right after. Don't show my account number on the air. Okay, Steve. Right after this. But on their application, they say that no precious gems or livestock will be accepted as payment. So I wrote, ha, ha, ha. How about rare books in print? But the Micro Bibliophile is another organization that I highly recommend anyone interested in miniature books reference it, look it up, and start to read. Their publications are gorgeous and illustrated and extremely informative, so that when I get one of these books in the mail, or the Miniature Book Society book in the mail, I read it immediately. I also recommend that you find out about the Fellowship of Bibliophile Societies. Miniature Book Society sent this out to me when I got the last copy of it. These books are very informative. They're learning tools, they're teaching tools, and it's fun. And my time is up. And so I am actually going to show you 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of my miniature books. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, everybody. Enjoy yourself. And Lindsay, you have a happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much.
The family that wears a headset together stays together. How's that? It's good to be back. We are going to introduce my good friend and somebody that I am so happy took to the book business. Thorne's been in the book business a few years now, and he has just, a duck to water doesn't do it justice. It was in your genes, even with your family's printing history, it was in your genes, you know. So it is a pleasure to introduce my good friend Thorne Donnelley of Liberty Books at 333 West Clematis Street in West Palm Beach. Thorne's going to be talking about Bibles and about good books that make good reference books. So Thorne, take it away.
All righty. Well, thank you. I hope I'll do what has turned from a vocation or an avocation into a vocation quite
vacation. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah. I wanted to mention to Rick that while I finished my most recent science fiction book, it's a trilogy. Actually, I think they have 4 books. It's about a space battleship called the Merrimack in about 100 years from now. And I loved, as a catch-on to description of this battleship, is that it one of the details they said about it is it carries more firepower than several small countries. And I always thought, I want one of those. That would be kind of a nice thing to have. But so along the way, you mentioned reference books, and I know Steve said he had a reference guide to science fiction, fantasy. Well, I've got one that I always like. It's by a guy by the name of Burgess, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So I use this. I'm sure Rick's seen it before, but it's also, I love reference books. The walls behind me, these aren't any of the books for sale. They're reference books that I like. We'll talk about some for the Bibles in a minute. But Rick was talking about the difficult, the future and how he gets lost in the timelines and stuff. And there's a book that I happen to have for sale. It's by Edward Bellamy. It's called Looking Backwards. And what I have here is not exactly the book. It's a lovely case for it. Basically, for those of you that aren't too familiar, a lot of expensive books are stored in cases. So like this one becomes somewhat of a Chinese puzzle for me to remove the parts of it as we go along here. But this is a copy of a book that was written in 1887. The actual title is Looking Backward, 2000 to 1887. And this particular copy is in very good shape, and I have it for sale myself. But it's interesting. I was told, I was wondering what Rick would have to say. This was probably one of the first dystopian books telling about the future. They talk about things such as credit cards or more debit cards. Academics have said that there's a lot of Marxism or future communism in here. You got to remember the guy was writing right at the end of the 19th century when America was becoming a world power. Our Industrial Revolution, the Civil War was long gone. We were becoming a good thing. And then 2000, well, that was only 15 years ago. Quick question for Rick. Did you ever read this book, and did you ever use any of this kind of stuff in your work? It's not really science fiction.
Yes, absolutely. I read that book during my work on my master's. When I was very lucky, I had a professor who was a fantasist who'd come to fantasy through Tolkien, which is academically respectable. And then so she thought that my interest in science fiction and fantasy was welcome. And I took a couple of directed readings from her. And at one point I read Bellamy and Jules Verne and far too many H.G. Wells.
Oh, what a great
Wells wrote a lot of stuff. But yeah, that's the beginnings. That's the roots of at least one of the major branches of science fiction. And it's a very, very interesting book. And it's very predictive, as science fiction often is. And it comes as close, I guess, as anybody comes to successfully predicting the future. Wells and Verne were doing the same thing, of course. So
yeah, of course. No, I saw a great effort. Attention. Anybody wants to read a closer copy of it, this one is for sale. So please give me a call. But what I was really here to talk about today was Bibles. So I gave a quick, about a 5 or 7 minute show on Facebook a couple of days ago about an auction, but I thought I'd bring back a little bit of Bibles in general. Obviously, the first, our Bible is of 2 parts. It's the Old Testament and New Testament. And I was lucky enough a number of years ago to go to Israel and see a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls. What they have there is a museum, but the actual part of the museum, they have facsimiles on the wall. They're doing a great deal of research. But there is actually one of the scrolls, it's Genesis, that is shown to the public. It's the real deal. No, you can't touch it because you would probably get shot by the guy in the corner with the Uzi. But beyond that, and what I understand fascinates me, apparently in the Jewish tradition, it was of incredible importance to be correct about writing the Word of God. So here we have something that was found. I think you all know the story. This was found, I guess, in the late 1940s. A couple of shepherd boys are wandering around, find this stuff that's basically 2,000 years old. They dig it up, take it out of the Bibles, and here you take it to, I sell Bibles in my bookstore here, brand new ones, and you can easily, it's almost word for word, 2,000 years what we're printing today for the Old Testament. And then there was the actual documentary evidence. It's just as we have it today with very few errors, which you really can't say so much for the New Testament. A lot of people, apparently Jesus spoke a language called the Aramaic, which is derived from there. The language of the literate people was Greek. Then it went off to get transferred to Roman, the Roman Vulgate. Then we had various, the Catholic Church kept that going. That was in Latin. Then you go on to have versions, King James Version, which became, the standard version we have in English. There were versions before it. I wanted to show some reference books that I kind of use. One I recommend, it's called The Book. It's a history of the Bible. It's not, it's a very, it's well illustrated, well written, easy to read. It is just kind of a nice book. I like reading that as a general go around. I have some personal references of the historical catalog of printed Bibles. Here's getting a little bit more technical, from 1525 to 1961. This is one of the books when you get a strange a strange Bible, you look it up and you find out all the wonderful things about it. But so these are a little more technical kind of books. One of the standards in the United States is called the English Bible in America, which again is a rather dull reading. As you can see, it is page after page after page of references, which brings me to, I guess, Steve had referred to, my family has been in the printing business since 1860. And for a long, long time, we, and I believe we still are, one of the world's leading printers of Bibles. And a story I told on Thursday, but I do like to share, is in the 1970s, a guy by the name of Hugh Hefner came to my Uncle Gaylord and had a contract to print a magazine called Playboy, which in those days was a successful magazine, somewhat risque magazine, although nowadays we would kind of consider it almost boring. I understand they finally stopped actually having nude pictures in it pretty recently. But we turned down the contract, and Mr. Hefner was, I guess, somewhat rude to my Uncle Gaylord and said, look, this is a $5 or $6 million contract. And Uncle Gay said, yeah, well, that's about 10% of our Bible business. So have a nice day. So, so always get a kick out of that. But the Bibles have been around for a long time. I get personally fascinated by the manuscript Bibles. Even though we're talking about printing here, one of the major efforts of the Catholic Church, the monasteries, whatever, for well over 1,000 years, was the fact that this is what they did. They copied Bibles, and they were done by monks. And if you've ever seen one of them, the first letters was usually an elaborate little picture, a beautiful handwork work of art, and it goes on and on and on. And they did it for thousands of years, and that kind of kept the monks alive, literature going. And for someone who's a true Bible scholar, in contrast to the Old Testament of the Hebrew tradition, the monks, some of these old manuscripts, they have in the little side writings at the end, oh, thank you, God, I'm finished, or there's mistakes, there's places where they've been etched over. My personal favorite, and I'm taking the printer's side on this, there is a Bible that is called, there's various names for it, but what it amounts to is we've all heard about the 10 Commandments. And this Bible was printed, and instead of the "Thou shalt not" part, they printed off some copies that said "Thou shalt commit adultery." And for obvious reasons, I take the printer's side, who was obviously I think was probably pretty mad at the publisher. People say that this is simply an error in typesetting. I can't see how you're doing a 1,000-page book. You make one error, and it's one word that changes the whole thing into becoming the adulterer's Bible. There's various other names for it, but I think that one's always kind of funny. But there's another. I also forgot to show you one of my favorite reference books for the manuscripts. Most manuscripts were written in Latin, which is not something some of us that went to a Catholic school had a little education in Latin. I used to smoke Marlboro cigarettes, which I believe the motto was "Veni, Vini, Vici." I came, I saw, I conquered, which was Julius Caesar's motto, but it's also, I've seen it in a cancer ward. That's my anti-smoking pledge for the day. But one of my favorite reference books is also Latin for Dummies. Very useful book. You can pick them up all day long for $5. And when you're looking through manuscripts or old writing, it's a good reference book to have.
I always recommend having a lot of language dictionaries to translate title pages. And Thorne, I want to thank you. Good presentation. I am now going to hand the program over to Lindsay.
Well, it's time for the big idea, which is where we wrap up the show with what's on our mind for the coming week. As usual, as the boy ingenue of the program, I'm devoid of ideas, except to ask our viewers, what's your favorite movie bookshop? Mine is in The Big Sleep, when Humphrey Bogart is casing the bookstore front that just happens to be across the street from the bookstore run by the comely brunette. So write us for next week and let us know what your favorite bookstore scenes are. But I know Alan had a couple of things he wanted to work in with Rick before we're done. So Alan, have at it.
Yes, I just had one big idea, and that is to call everyone's attention to a series that we are doing on the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair channel, where you'll also find this program. But it's a series called Tampa Bay's Hidden Gems. And what we're doing is going live on Facebook and visiting various wonderful places to come to when you come to the book fair in April of next year. Remember that there are great places to come to in the greater Tampa Bay area, and we want to visit some of those and just let you know about some of those. Recently, I had the occasion to visit the set for one of Rick's books. I went to Paso Grill and spent some time down there in Paso Grill, and that is on the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair channel. This afternoon, after this program is over, I will be going over the Skyway Bridge and doing a broadcast from there. So we invite you to join us on Tampa Bay's Hidden Gems, which will be part of the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair channel. Lindsay?
Well, I know, Alan, we've got a few minutes left here before Steve has to wrap up, and we can't let Rick get away without at least one W.P. Kinsella story. Did you have something in mind?
I never had a chance to meet him. He was in ill health. We were going to bring him. I used to be involved at USF with an annual science fiction symposium, and we were going to bring him in as the guest author, and it was very, very exciting just to have the chance to do that. But he was in pretty poor health, and then his health declined, and we weren't able to do it. I will say that one of my favorite publishers, they've published some of my work, is Tachyon Books in San Francisco, and they published a book called The Essential W.P. Kinsella, which is about half of it is his baseball stuff, and the other one is his native Canadian tribe stories, the Hobbema tribe that he is sort of conjured up. It's all brilliant, brilliant stuff. And I was very pleased that Tachyon came to me to write the introduction to that book, which was really wonderful. Gave me an excuse to reread the entire collection and realize how fabulous his writing is and how significant he's been to all of us who love to write about baseball, either with a fantasy element to it or a science fiction element to it. He's the one that opened that door for all of us with his success. So it was really I wish I had a chance to meet him, but it was wonderful to be working on his work.
Very nice. Very nice. That would have been a great meeting.
Yeah.
I have just a thought, and that is, remember that the book fair is April 21st through 23rd at the Coliseum in St. Petersburg, where there will be over 120 exhibitors from around the world and around the country. Do we have any guest questions? I thought I heard somebody say they had a book question earlier, or did I mistake that?
We actually have had some mail come in, and we will talk about that in next week's program.
Okay. Well, as we wind up this week's show, let's just close. Oh, whoops. We did the big idea. I'm sorry. That's all the time we have for today. Join us again on Saturday at 2:30 p.m. for the next episode of the Rare Book Cafe right here on YouTube Live. During the week, join us on Rare Book Cafe's Facebook page, where we invite you to post, comment, question, and share us with your friends. If you have a question, we'd love to know it. If you whatever friends you would like to share us with, we would totally appreciate it. You can also email us questions and comments and send us photos of your book treasures at rarebookcafe@gmail.com. That's rarebookcafe@gmail.com. And don't forget to join me next Saturday for Bucks on the Bookshelf on WDBFradio.com. We're going to be talking with Gordon Hollis of Golden Legend Books about a very interesting topic in the 21st century as related to antiquarian book dealers. Remember that the Rare Book Cafe is brought to you by the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair, celebrating 36 years, April 21st through 23rd of 2017. The Florida Antiquarian Book Fair features more than 100 book dealers from around the country and around the world. It's paradise. We'll see you guys next week. Happy book sales and trails to you.
See ya.